John Stephen Aquari was an Olympic marathon runner. 1968 Mexico Olympics. He'd come to represent his country, Tanzania, in the marathon. And the crowd started to cheer as the first marathoners entered into the Olympic Stadium and took their final lap around the track. As the day went on and more runners came in and finished, the crowd kind of started to lose some of their enthusiasm until evening came and they thought the race was over. But that's when Mr. Aquari came into the stadium. He was limping, bloodied, bandaged. You see, they didn't know it. The people in the stadium didn't know it, but he had fallen early in the race, gotten up, hurt and wounded, had continued on. They noticed that he was giving it his best effort, and so the crowd, as thinned out as it was, they stopped in the aisles and started to cheer for him. Mr. Aquari ran around that track in a most dignified manner. He did the best he could. And when he crossed the finish line, the crowd gave him one last cheer. Afterwards, in the press room, one reporter asked him, "Why did you finish when you'd fallen and you were hurt? Why keep going?" And John Stephen Aquari said, "My country did not send me 7,000 miles to start this race. It sent me here, 7,000 miles away, to finish the race." And that's exactly what is in front of each of us as Christians. Not how we start our Christian life, but how do we finish? In Revelation chapter 2, Jesus says to a church that they had lost their first love. They were doing a lot of really good things in ministry, in the community, but he could see in their heart that they'd lost their first love. They loved other things now more than him. And wouldn't that be a tragedy if you and I didn't finish the race that God had marked out for us because we had lost our first love of Jesus? So we're just considering reasons why we love Jesus, reasons why we're drawn to him, reasons why we want to follow him, reasons why we want to finish the race. And today, we're just going to consider this. I love Jesus, and I hope you do too. I love Jesus because he is the one who forgives all my sin. If I were to ask you who the greatest sinner you know is, you might be tempted to think of a friend at work or maybe a family member who drives you crazy. You might think of someone evil in history. There's plenty to choose from. You might think of others, but if you'd asked the Apostle Paul who he thought the worst sinner was, he would have said himself. Listen to what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 1. He says, "For this very reason I was shown mercy, so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his unlimited patience." Did you hear that? Paul thought he was the worst of sinners. Was he? Well, how would you measure that? The important thing is not where he would rank on all sinners of all time. The important thing to think about is that he was the worst sinner that he knew of. Who's the worst sinner that you know of? Let me tell you the right answer, or at least the biblical answer. The worst sinner that I know of is me. The worst sinner I know of is me. My sin should bother me more than anyone else's sin. See, that's what Jesus meant when he said to the woman at the end of Luke 7, he said that those who are forgiven much love much. His point wasn't that some people are forgiven more and some less. His point was that some of us sense or feel or grasp how much we are forgiven and some don't. There's a woman named Jill Price. She was diagnosed a very rare condition called super autobiographical memory. And people diagnosed, again, with this very rare condition can remember every moment of their life with crystal clarity. She can remember every moment of her life since she was 14. And you might think that's great. It would do me well on tests if I was still a student, right? But it turns out it's a curse because she remembers every bad attitude, every hurtful comment that she ever said. She's plagued by guilt because she can remember everything she's ever done wrong in her life? What do you do with the things that you do wrong? Oftentimes, I just quickly brush them aside. I sweep them under the rug and I just head on in my life and try to ignore them. But God doesn't do that. God knows every sin that I've ever committed, and yet He loves me because He died for me. He gave His life for me. He redeemed me. He wants to forgive me. He doesn't hold my sin against me, but Jesus bore the wrath that I deserved. That's why I love Jesus, because He forgives me, the worst of sinners. I hope you love Jesus too. See you tomorrow.